I'd like to transition over to Steve Bloom, who is a true veteran of the cannabis industry. He's seen more than 30 years of transformation, and we are so honored to have him today delivering the State of the Industry address. So I'd like to invite
I've made him presenter. He should be able to pop his video on.
Okay.
And just a note here for everybody is if you are actually not a presenter or speaking at the moment, just a reminder to all the other presenters that are listening in, please mute your microphones so that we don't hear the background noise or have anything or have the screen dropping away from whoever actually is presenting or speaking, please. And then that way we get the full effect and we don't hear phones ringing or kids screaming or, parties going on in the background while everybody's enjoying, steak and scotch and cigars on this side.
Yeah, I might have to go pull a cron here and go get a scotch in a second myself and a cigar.
We're all in different time zones. That's great.
Are we all set?
Okay, Steve. Yeah, there you go, Steve. Great to see you.
Hi there. So I'll just see myself up in the little corner there, right?
Yeah, no, you're good.
We can see you on the full screen.
We can see you full screen. You're good.
Okay. So thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Denise, reaching out to me. I'm in New York City, and, everybody knows this is where the epicenter of the corona crisis is, and I've been indoors for 28 days, and so it's nice to speak to people. Although I've been speaking to a lot of people by phone, a lot of conversations, but obviously, we're isolated. A little more isolation here than probably where you are. So I also want to wish my Jewish friends out there happy Passover, celebrating. We have to celebrate some things right now. I'd like to go into a background on myself. Just like you said, Denise, when you introduced me that I have over 30 years in cannabis, my career in cannabis goes back to working at High Times in the late 80s. I worked there for 20 years. I'd like to step back just a little further and how I even got there. My background is I'm a music journalist. In the late 70s, I started my music writing career. I was a high school and college newspaper editor. I learned everything I needed to know in school, how to be a journalist and a writer and an editor. I was lucky to get a start then in some really good programs. And I started a career as a music writer because I like music and I like to write. And I wasn't good enough to be a musician, but I was good enough to be a writer. So I decided to write about one of my passions. And being a freelance writer just kind of had me moving around from one thing to another. Beyond music, I had interest in entertainment in general, and one thing led me to another in terms of jobs in the 80s. I wrote a book about video games, and I worked for a magazine called Video Games Magazine. And while I was at Video Games, I hired a guy named John Holmstrom, who was famous for his work as the editor of Punk magazine, and he did cartoon work, and he was doing these great cartoon drawings of video game reviews in Heavy Metal magazine. And my editor for my book said, you should get this guy to do some work for your magazine. And I did. Turns out John Holmstrom, several years later, ended up at High Times. And that's how I ended up at High Times. He invited me over there to do some freelancing and some proofreading. And one day I got a call in 1988. They were looking for a news editor. And that really wasn't my background. My background was really in entertainment. But I decided to go for it. I had written for Rolling Stone back in those days, New York Magazine, Daily News, all kinds of places, but nobody offered me a job. Well, lo and behold, High Times offered me a job. So I took it. And it was a part-time job. I worked 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And my background with marijuana is that I was a smoker from a young age. I'm of the hippie generation of the late 60s. We started smoking pot in high school, and that's when I began. But going through the years in New York, growing up, New York, I didn't realize this at the time, but I learned it later by being at High Times, is that New York's attitude around marijuana was pretty laid back. You've heard more recently the massive number of arrests we've had in New York, not lately, but under Bloomberg and Giuliani. But back those days, you really had to like blow smoke in the face of a cop to get arrested. They really didn't care. So it was very laid back. New York had a smoking event, which I didn't go to. The High Times magazine was published. I hardly read it. It was not something I was advocating about. It was just something I liked to do. But once I got the High Times, that changed everything. Every 2 weeks I walked in and I got a stack of mail. And back then, late 80s, mail was coming in, no internet. I would go through the box of mail. And lo and behold, almost every letter was a bust story. I had no idea that so many people are getting arrested for marijuana all over the country. Nobody was writing about it. Now think about it, 1988, kind of the dark ages for marijuana legalization. You had Bush in office. You had all kinds of attacks on the marijuana community, arrests left and right. There was no hope of any kind of legalization. And High Times was barely hanging on by a string. But came into the 90s and things started to change. And, Bill Clinton was elected. There was a new permissiveness around marijuana. Marijuana kind of became cool again. And the whole revival of the marijuana legalization movement really started. I look at it as like, it started in the 70s with NORML. It almost died out in the 80s under Reagan, and it came back in the 90s, thanks to the Democrats and Clinton being in office. Not that Clinton was the greatest advocate, but just Democratic leadership led us in the direction that was more or less okay to start using marijuana again and advocating for it. And then, of course, in 1996 came Prop 215, which legalized medical marijuana in California. And that was the biggest breakthrough, during my years at High Times. And that changed everything. And we covered the hell out of medical marijuana back then. And I, wrote a couple of good stories that I'm very proud of. And we contributed to teaching people that marijuana had many other uses than just getting high. And I had to learn that too. I wasn't really aware of that until I figured it out. I had to hang out with patients and get to know really what was going on. I became friends with Elby Musica, who is famous for being one of the federal medical marijuana patients and gets a tin of marijuana every month from the government. She still does. She's one of the few left. And so I got to meet everybody. And also at that time, I met all the NORML people. I became High Times liaison to NORML. I went to all the rallies. I went to Hash Bash. I went to the Great American Harvest Festival in Madison. I went to the ones in DC, New York, wherever. Seattle Hemp Fest, Boston Freedom Rally. I just went everywhere, met everybody. And so over the years, I've made a lot of friends, a lot of contacts. I've seen a lot of people come and go. I knew a lot of the great leaders, the original people who really founded this movement, Jack Herer and Dennis Perone, people like that. Ben Maisel, a lot of the so-called hippie activists who started it. And so I have a good grounding in the history of the activist movement to legalize marijuana. And so that led me through my years at High Times. Now, my switch at High Times was that I was news editor for a couple of years, and then I went into the music side. They asked me to start covering music, and we started to deal with the celebrity aspect in the 90s of bands being interested in marijuana. And it started with Cypress Hill. If you look back there, the Cypress Hill cover on the my plaque, and we started to get bands one after another in the magazine, and I became kind of like a celebrity chaser. Who could we get on the cover of High Times? So we had a lot of great people, Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube. One of the things that was really cool then too was that hip hop was a real bridge to the African American community that really wasn't being, there wasn't much of a focus on what was happening in the African American community when it came to marijuana. And that opened that door, which was really good. And I'm a little proud of having something to do with that. And so I worked my way through High Times through the years. And as time went on, 2007, I left High Times almost 20 years in. And I wrote a book called Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life with my friend Charlotte Halperin. And I started looking for new work. And I found a job with Freedom Leaf about 7 years. Oh, no, I'm sorry, back up. I started Celeb Stoner, my website, which was an outgrowth of what I was doing at High Times. And it's still out there, celebstoner.com. I'm always...
I just got to say briefly that High Times was the greatest magazine I'd ever seen. I used to open up that centerfold like it was a naked woman in a Playboy, but it was the bud of the month or something very good. Never seen pot that good. Could not afford pot that good. Thank you so much for bringing us High Times.
Hey, Karan, thanks for jumping in and saying that. And by the way, I'm waiting for you to do a flute solo.
Absolutely. Gonna bust something out from Mr. Paul.
Okay. But yes, and I mean, High Times we were legendary for sure. And, and beloved. It was nice to go to a place and people, they practically bowed down to us. I mean, it was almost over flattering. We're just editors of a magazine, and the job was really the job of just having to put out a magazine, but it happened to be about marijuana. But the fun part of it for me was it was advocacy. So you could kind of, you didn't have to stand on the sidelines. You could have an opinion, and we could say legalize it. We weren't, saying, well, you're not supposed to say that. We got to, we can say it, and we did. And obviously, High Times was, ahead of the game in that advocacy. And it was really High Times and NORML until the Marijuana Policy Project, the Drug Policy Alliance. They all came along and they started to really pitch in. But High Times kind of united everybody because we were the vehicle to read all about it, and everybody was all in the magazine. And so it was really a great time and a lot of fun to do all of that. And I had a great run. And that was my 20-year run. And I started Celeb Stoner. And then a few years later, I got a job with Freedom Leaf magazine. And I find Freedom Leaf to be kind of an interesting story and a cautionary tale for people who are in the marijuana industry. A startup company on the OTC penny stock. They started to be wanted to be a magazine company, but they really couldn't find any revenue. So they went over into CBD production and bought a CBD line and started a CBD line, and then went for about 5 years. And then just last year, the company merged with GL Hemp out of Green Lotus Hemp out of Dallas, and I lost my job because they really didn't want to be a media company. They just wanted Freedom Leaf's CBD lines. So I got squeezed out. So this is the nature of this industry, but I sort of bop around from gig to gig. And now my latest gig is I'm editing magazines for Centennial Media. They do these great magazines back here. Marijuana Goes Mainstream, CBD Guide, and you can find them in Barnes & Noble and Whole Foods. Right now, of course, a little hard to find the mags. And so I continue, my life in the media covering marijuana, CBD, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. And so that kind of brings me to the present. That's kind of how I got here. The present, it's a rough time right now for our industry, to say the least. The industry was not in really the best shape prior to the virus spread. We had the vape problem, which for some reason I saw people minimize, but I really considered that a major problem and a major black eye for the marijuana industry, even despite the fact that most of it was black market. But the fact is, the problem for why this was all happening is because there's not enough states that are legalized. So in a state like New York, you can't get those cartridges that everybody wants their hands on. And if you do get them, you're getting them from some black market place. It's not legal. And I'll tell you, vape pens became really chic in New York a few years ago. Everybody wanted one. Everybody, they thought it was the coolest thing. And now everybody's puffing on black market vapes. Look what happened, So I'm not blaming the industry by any means, but, it's just, here we have adulterated marijuana products that could be bad for you, and so you kind of maybe fall back on, flour and things that are less adulterated, and it's healthier and better for you, even if maybe you shouldn't be smoking that much maybe at this point in time. But in general, it's okay. So we had a big black eye with the vape crisis, which thankfully sort of went away, although nobody's focusing on it. There's probably a few more deaths attached to that I wouldn't even know about. And now comes the corona crisis. It's just, let's just say, we're in for the long haul. This is not something that's going to get resolved tomorrow, like that answer by Marvin Washington, which I put in there to find out where football is going to be. How are 80,000 fans going to be packing into a stadium? I don't see it this year. I think almost like this year, in a lot of ways, is a write-off. 2020 is, over in a sense that, we look ahead beyond, but I mean, not for our industry, but I think in general, in terms of congregating anywhere at any time.
It just hit me. If Larry David and Woody Allen had a child, it would look just like you, though.
I appreciate that. A lot of people call me Larry David.
It's great.
I get stopped a lot of times. I'm not wearing my wireframes. I'm wearing my wireframes, and you really think so? But thanks. I've been stopped so many times. Never Woody Allen, but I've been stopped 100 times with Larry David.
No, it could be the bad video feed, but yes, it does.
No, it's true. It's true, and I love Larry David. He's so funny.
I'm sorry. Continue. It's fascinating.
So I mean, I sort of my state of the industry is a lot of gloom and doom. I don't really see. I see a future, but I don't see the future right ahead. I mean, I think that we're in a lot of trouble because the industry was in trouble, prior to the virus, prior to the vape crisis. Stocks had gone down. Canada was not rolling out the way it should. California just botched things royally. And, and it really bothers me what's happened to look back to, my history of knowing the people who started this stuff, getting pushed out the door, not getting opportunities. I hear these stories about everybody out of work in Northern California. This is where it all started. These people should be the ones who are benefiting the most. Vancouver, they shut down all these cool dab bars and stuff that Cannabis Culture and other companies set up. Those are great places. They had to take it over and shut it down and put all the activists and people who really started things out of business. Is that right? I don't think so. And so I think there's a lot of bad karma running through our industry these days because a lot of people have come in who have nothing to do with it and just want to make money. You have the Mad Men companies who are just horrendous and hopefully will go out of business. And thank goodness, South Park parodied them, because they deserve it. These big companies coming in, buying up all the licenses and pushing everybody out. Well, that's over, at least for now, because the stores are not going to operate properly for quite a while. And yes, it's essential. And I understand that. And I agree marijuana is essential. But I also read a story today about bud tenders getting, very concerned, about working right now. And,
Right.
It's not okay, for people to be getting sick in our stores, so there's got to be a way to provide marijuana without people getting ill. And that means curbside pickups and deliveries and not going into any stores. It's got to be a way, and so we really have to figure this out too. Every store is not perfect. The people who are the more responsible are going to do the right thing. The people who are less they're going to push people in together and not care. That's what's happening at supermarkets all over New York. One has a nice line outside, another one's got a crowd. So it depends who's running it, who's managing it, and who gives a crap.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of people fall to the wayside that aren't that don't have their heart and soul into the events, like the .com bubble. When a number of people came in, didn't quite know what to do, but they knew if they had .com following their name, somebody would buy something virtually online. So hopefully, this whole shakeup is going to let the better products rise at the top.
Well, one thing I also want to bring up is, the impact of the coronavirus on legislation and legalization. Not just the industry itself, which is having problems and it's going to continue to have problems during this whole period, but the fact that this is a huge year. 2020 presidential election year is a huge year for legalization. 2016, despite the fact that Trump won, 8 out of 9 legalization measures won across the country. Massachusetts, Nevada, all these states went legal. And that was going to happen again in 2020. But none of these measures now are going to get on the ballot because how are you going to do that? And there were 3 that were already on the ballot. I'm not sure what's going to happen. New Jersey for recreational, Mississippi for medical, and South Dakota for recreational. So I'm going to say right here, I think New Jersey is going to pass recreational. I mean, here's my point. 75% of the initiatives that are put on the ballot for marijuana pass. People love to vote for pot. They love it. They go there. There's nobody's watching. They do pot legal, and it's happened over and over and over again. That's the easiest way to legalize marijuana is through ballot initiatives, and it's harder. I mean, Illinois pulled it off, but New York can't pull it off within its legislature. Some states don't have initiatives and these ballot initiatives that can get things legal, like California and a lot of the Western states. We don't have that in New York. You have to go through the legislature, and it's really rough. Even if you have the Governor Cuomo behind us, he still can't make it happen. Would you believe? The most powerful governor in America right now can't get legalization happening in New York. So we're up against that. And I will say New Jersey will probably pass it if people get to go to vote. You okay there, Ron? If people get to vote.
Down below me.
If people get to vote, I mean, we saw what happened in Wisconsin, so we don't know. But let's say, we don't know what the election is going to be like. But if the election is done properly, New Jersey will pass legalization. Mississippi, I don't know enough about, but there's a lot of medical states down south now. There's Arkansas and Louisiana. So maybe Mississippi could pull it off. Plus, Mississippi is a decriminalized state, which most people don't know. That was going back to the 70s decrim days, and you wouldn't think so, but they are. And I would say South Dakota is unlikely because, I mean, they're not going for medical, which is usually the best way to start. They're going for recreational. South Dakota is one of 3 states in the whole country that does not have any laws on the books for legalizing marijuana, recreational, CBD, hemp, nothing. So all of a sudden South Dakota is going to legalize it? I don't think so.
Well,
I'll
they've
give
got
you.
a lot of farmland out there. Maybe the farmers are looking at the cash crop value of hemp.
I don't think it'll pass. I don't think enough people will vote for it. But I'll give you a quiz, Ron. Which are the 3 states that do not have any marijuana legalization laws whatsoever? The 3. I just gave you one. South Dakota. What are the other 2?
South Dakota. We're going to go with Nebraska.
No, they have decrim. They have decrim. They do.
What?
Marijuana is decriminalized in Nebraska, of all places. These things happened in the 70s when it was, whatever, things were easier then to get it done. 12 or so states, went decrim, including New York in the 70s. But okay, think of 2 more. Any ideas? They're kind of in the middle in the Northwest.
Tennessee?
No, they have CBD.
Idaho.
Idaho is right. You are correct. And there's one more right in the middle of the country.
Middle of all
Missouri. No, Missouri has
a little
west.
west of Missouri.
Kansas. No.
Kansas. Right.
Oh.
47 states in the U.S. have some sort of legalization law, whether it's recreational, medical, full medical, or CBD. 14 states have CBD. In some level of what levels of CBD you could have, how much THC can be in the CBD product and stuff like that. That's pretty good when you think about it. 47 states in the U.S. But again, we go back to that discussion that you were having earlier about federal legalization, which I don't see happening. Some people think maybe, just maybe, that a lot of people think maybe Trump will embrace legalization. I don't see it. I don't think he's for it. The only reason I think he would do that is for the money that everybody can make in it. But like McConnell, who pushed through hemp, and he'll have a big hemp company someday for sure.
Well, it would certainly solve some huge banking problems that individual states are having, making a federally insured account.
But they're not passing that. That's sitting in the Senate, and it's not going anywhere. The Safe Banking Act is just sitting in the Senate, and it's not going to go anywhere. And nor will any of the other recreational efforts to legalize it or to deschedule, with Trump as president. The only thing is that some people think, well, if Trump really wants to win over the marijuana voter, he does something positive about marijuana and he swings all the Bernie people over to him, which wouldn't be so dumb. But I don't think he'll do it.
But I think we still have to go after then Kansas, South Dakota, and Idaho.
Right, Idaho.
Let's get them.
Shout out to my friend Jade Jacobs from Idaho, who's watching now.
The potato farmer that you knew back in the 70s.
Right. She's another kind of farmer.
Yeah, Idaho isn't even recognizing the federal legalization of hemp.
Exactly.
At this point. Last year, I don't know if any of you heard about the driver who was coming from a farm in Oregon, decided to, after the hemp law, after hemp became legal, decided to take a shortcut from his normal route through legal states and drove through Idaho, got pulled over. A dog smelled the cannabis, the hemp that was in there, tested positive for the THC, which was all they needed, because, 0.03% is still some THC in there. And he's facing trafficking charges, which could carry 30 years for him.
This is happening everywhere because the cops don't know the difference between
hemp and
cannabis, or they don't know the difference. It happened in New York, and 2 guys who have a CBD company in New York City were shipping some hemp from Vermont, all legal, but it was stopped in Vermont first and by FedEx, and then it got approved, and it comes to New York. It's almost a funny story in a way. It's funny in its own way. They get sent to New York, and the cops, it gets intercepted again because again FedEx had tipped off the cops. And then they get a call from the police. We have your hemp. Come and pick it up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I heard about this.
What happened? The 2 brothers. One brother was ill. He couldn't go. He sent his brother, I think his younger brother. His younger brother got arrested.
Uh-huh.
Nice. That's how Big Brother...
When the cops tell you come pick up your hemp, I don't think I'm going in New York. Sorry.
Yeah. Send a bicycle messenger.
Right. I saw a press conference with them. They told that story, and I almost had to laugh.
That's Uber pickup at come convenient dead. I was almost arrested in, I believe it was New York as well, taking a look at Niagara Falls. I thought I'd puff a little doobie in the car and we'd go to Rainbow, I think is on the U.S. side. Well, we find out we're in line at the international border crossing to go into Canada. They didn't have legalized marijuana consumption in Canada at the time, and we opened the sunroof, all the windows and all the doors as we pulled up to the border crossing and decided that maybe we didn't smell as bad as we thought. We made it in, and Niagara Falls is one bitchin' place to see.
I'm not so lucky as you. I've been arrested for marijuana 3 times.
What?
Yeah, 3 times. Yeah, twice in New Jersey and once in New York.
Wow.
Well, as a public figure who wrote about it, you certainly might have been a target for the DEA back in the day.
Not really. I mean, yeah, maybe we thought when we go to Amsterdam all the time to do cannabis cups, they might be looking at us on our way back, kind of things like that. You know, what are we carrying with us and that sort of stuff. I had a time back from Amsterdam. I took a lot of like paraphernalia back with me, but you know, nothing else. But my bag was like bursting at the seams, and it kind of opened when it came out of the bag thing. I was totally freaking out. They were going to pull me over and go through everything. They let me out. Close it up and get out of here. So sometimes it's our own paranoia that they're really after us. There were people at High Times who believed that, a lot more paranoid than me. Those are the people who wouldn't use their real names. And, you know, funny story about High Times. My name is Steve Bloom, and a lot of people have names like Danny Danko and Kyle Cushman and Dan Sky, and they all made up names, cute names. I helped make a few of those names. And it said somebody one day came up to me and said, "Wow, you have a great name you made up for High Times." I said, No, my name is Steve Bloom. So I feel like all these Bloom companies, especially one of your earlier sponsors, they owe me a little something in return. At least send me a sample.
That's right. Every month.
Right.
Here we go. We have a product right there in Denise's hand from the Bloom people.
I really want to thank you for this. You did a great job, and you're so on schedule. It's unbelievable. Denise, unbelievable. Wow.
Thank you. We cracked the whip around here.
That's great. You know, I mean,
yeah, I'll be sending you some Bloom hemp products, Steve, just for you.
This is really the beginning of a new wave of types of communicating. I'm happy that I'm part of this because I'm learning as I'm going along. Sadly, yesterday I did my first Zoom, and it was a funeral, not to do with the COVID, but an older friend of the family passed away this week, and
sorry.
And we the first time. So I only yesterday, put it on my phone, and today now I'm on. Yes, I couldn't quite figure it out today. With your help, it's all worked out. But I do want to say, I'm sad to say, but I do think, in my gloom and doom forecast, I do think conferences and all that kind of stuff are not going to happen for the rest of the year either. I really do. I really believe. I mean, I know people want to get things going right away, but we're in for a long haul. Like I said, this is not over tomorrow. We see what's happening in New York, and it's spreading with brush fires all over the country. And I hope it'll stop, but it's going to continue to spread for a while. And then there's possibilities of returns. We're going to have a new way of doing things in this country. Some of them people are worried about invasive of our privacy, tracking systems and temperature testing to get into things. And, you're not going to be able to crowd into a bar. You're certainly not going to be able to go into a big sporting event. You're not going to be able to have a festival, for Bonnaroo kind of events. You're not going to, Burning Man got canceled today. All this stuff is kind of over for this year. I just wish people would I know people need to get back to work, and that's the most important thing. But a lot of these big industries, the cruise industry, goodbye and good riddance. I hate to say it. And anybody see what the Pope said? The Pope said that this is one thing about this. It's like, this is the way we're treating the planet. This is sort of the answer. This is like the karmic response to how bad we're treating it. He talked about the fires in Australia and things like that. And I know it's not directly connected, but look what's happening right now with the lack of flying and driving. Pollution is down. The environment's better. You can see the Himalayas. That's not a joke. Those photos they're posting is real. The smog has gone down from India. That's the silver lining.
But Steve, the truth is that it is interconnected, and climate change does have an impact on global pandemics. Mainly because the habitats for the animals that carry these viruses, who ordinarily live in the canopy of the rainforest, they're having to come closer to human populations. And then there are the vectors like the mosquitoes who are carrying them to the animals, and the way that we treat the animals. And, these open slaughter markets. And we're creating the perfect environment, the perfect storm for these pandemics to occur more and more frequently. And our resistance is low because of the way that humans treat their own bodies. So it is all interconnected, but I think you're absolutely right about changing life as we know it. Things are not going to be the same for a long time. But yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you, Steve, for all the work that you've done, because as we're going to talk about at 1:30, and feel free to stay on and join us at 1:30, the media plays a big role in education. We took on our initiative back in 2013, and we've come so far with engaging the world with it. There's a compliant way to do it, and there's a not so compliant way to do it. So as a collective voice around the world, what we're doing is assembling those that have the experience of educating the world through the proper channels in order to maintain this industry and to grow it. So anyhow, I really, really appreciate your time and for joining us all the way from New York.
Yeah, I'll gladly stick around and participate. I've been on all day, really. When I don't have too much else to do. I could have been maybe editing a story or two, but it's Saturday, so why not? Saturdays should be a kind of a break, and it's for me Shabbos or Sabbath, and it's Passover, so kind of a day of rest. But I will say one thing. Follow up on High Times, Kron. High Times is not in good shape. Also, this industry, High Times is kind of a reflection of what's happening in the overall industry, that this great legendary brand is struggling so mightily, and partially due to mismanagement and misuse of funds and bungling of their finances, I'm sure, and the new people who came in and bought the company 4 years ago, and kind of taking it somewhat down the tubes, and they have laid off most of their staff. I understand the magazine staff is laid off. Danny Danko has been laid off. The editor was laid off. That magazine is not going to come out. So you might have seen your last issue of High Times. I've been sort of predicting that because they're, how you doing, Leslie? They're in a tough spot, and they need to throw something overboard, and now they don't even have their events. So what is High Times going to do? And
it's a reminder to everybody who appreciates that kind of journalism and the specialized care that was put into it for so many years, to support subscriptions when you encounter the opportunity to subscribe to something that cannot survive without subscribers, especially now advertising is going to be dropping off significantly. It's going to be very difficult for people to continue to produce good journalism. So, if you're out there and you see a please subscribe button, even if it's not a paid subscription, or even if it is, support that journalism, because otherwise they're just not going to survive this economic crash and this pandemic pause that we're all taking right now.
Well, there's always websites, so yeah. I mean, if you're not going to read the hard copy, so to speak, you can always go to the website. But you're right. I mean, but the problem with High Times back in the day, I don't know how it's been recently, but their subscription base was always low. The readership was a little paranoid. They didn't want to get stuff in the mail. They didn't want to be on a mailing list. And they would go to stores and buy a copy of High Times from behind the counter and go running out the door.
Right. But they were still paying for it.
They were still paying for it, exactly. And you get a good deal when you subscribe, but most of them would pay the cover price and go that way, and maybe buy 8 or 10 issues a year than getting all of them. But yeah, that would be hopeful. But I think it's a little too late for High Times when it comes to that.
Yeah. I remember being delivered to my home in brown paper wrappers.
Exactly.
But enough
right.
Golf. I was a closet golfer.
Thank you so much, Steve, and we're really looking forward to the continued conversation at 1:30.